It is exactly 8:30. It is Tuesday, March the 10th, and welcome to week five of Introduction to Criminal Law. I'm Professor Richard Wright. I will be here for the next hour or less, sharing information with you about week five. As I said to you some weeks back, that the quarter was going to go pretty fast. And so I'm going to just go ahead and start sharing my screen so that you can see. Here we go. Okay. So let's go down to, you see the schedule. This is week five. We have one more lecture. That will be 1 week from today, the 17th. You see all the lectures from previous weeks here. Let's take a look at what we're going to talk about today. Crimes against moral values. We're going to talk about drug laws and drug driving, distracted driving, hate crimes, little key terms for practice, drunk driving, and forced blood draws. Identify the drug schedule and quiz. I previously sent you Chapter 7 PowerPoints of the text, a brief introduction to criminal law, and that your initial post relating to drunk driving will be due tonight at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, as your reply post are due Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Finally, complete the written assignment. Has a hate crime been committed? And that's due this Sunday. And then remember, you're going to we ask you to continue to be strong and finish strong. We are at the finish next week. And you know my motto, adversity is the springboard to success. So let's look at the course calendar. You'll see how short it is. And there it is. We are right here today. Notice what will happen. That a week from today, your course ends 3 days later. So these are your assignments again for the week. Your initial post, then your reply post, then your written assignment that we'll talk about with the rubric in a minute, and then your key phrase. Notice that next week is a shortened week because your course does not end the 22nd. It ends the 20th because remember, this is a 5.5 course. So therefore, all written assignments must be in by the 20th, and we'll talk about that next week. I do want to take time to remind you, and some students have asked, can they submit assignments from weeks 1, 2, and 3? And the answer is no. I discussed this previously, indicated that after week 4 was completed, that you could not submit those. If you do, they will not be graded. And the reason is because week 3, as I shared, was the midterm. That was the halfway point. And then week 4, then you had to have completed 1 to 3. Remember the exam that you had, the quiz, week 3 covered 1, 2, and 3. All right, so now we're in the second half dealing with modules 4, 5, and 6. And what I said was after week 4 was due, you cannot turn in assignments from week 1 to 3. And that would have been Sunday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. So as of yesterday, if you have not submitted 1 to 3, it will be too late. You cannot do it. I already had a student to reach out to me and let me know that they had some problems. Well, now they're letting me know, and the course is just about over. I'm not going to give a break in those kind of situations. And as I grade, as I said, those of you who submitted stuff and I haven't finished grading it, I've finished 2. I have 3 and 4 I'll be working on this week, and then 5 over the weekend. And then, of course, week 6 after the 20th. So, and then one student asked me, what would they be able to get a D in my course? I said during week 1, do not ask me how to get a C or any lower grades in my class. I says I will not provide those answers. So if you go back and listen to the open house, you'll hear me say that from the beginning. So let's get into what we're going to talk about today. Module 5, crimes against moral values. So you're starting with the drunk driving discussion post, your initial post, as I said, to do tonight, your reply post Saturday. Your written assignment for Module 5, has a hate crime been committed? And this is not a 1-part, this is not a 2-part, this is a 3-part. You're going to look at this from 3 different perspectives. From the police officer's perspective, that should be 1 page, a minimum of 1 page, with citations and/or references. Do not lean heavily on the textbook. I repeat, do not. And then, of course, you know better than to use Wikipedia. One student did do this, and they got zapped for it. And then the second part is the defense attorney perspective, and then the detective perspective. So I've kind of filled all of these roles in my professional: police officer, defense attorney, and not the detective itself, but I was an investigator. And so you're going to make sure that you satisfy the requirements that are set out here, and they are reflected in your rubric. If you look at the rubric, you will see you'll get 10 points, meets a minimum of 1 page. Meets a minimum of 1 page. Minimum of 1 page. If you have a half a page or 1 of these, you're going to lose some points. You're going to lose at least 3 points. So let's say, for example, if you didn't satisfy the requirements for this, you could lose 3, 6, 9 points right off the bat. And then if you don't have citations and references, then you can lose, or citations, and references, you're going to lose 5 points. So you can lose 14 points out of 40 points. So you don't want to do that, okay? So that's for that assignment. And then, let's go back. Again, throughout the whole course, I've encouraged you to use the guides for criminal justice that was designed for this course specifically to deal with the online library, APA requirements, tutoring if you needed help. Make sure you run your papers through Grammarly, as I do. And then, of course, your live classroom phrase, whatever that will be, I will talk about that later. Okay. Any questions about the assignments? If there are nothing in the chat box, I will keep going forth. I'll wait a minute. Any questions? Okay. Seems there are none. If you think of, you can still type them in the chat box. I'll still address them. All right, so let's go back and let's talk about the content of this. So we're going to talk about crimes against moral values. What are they? laws pertaining to hate crimes, laws pertaining to intoxicated driving or driving under the influence or distracted driving, and then the enforcement of drug laws. So we're going to deal with hate crimes. So we're going to talk about drug laws, drunk driving, distracted driving, and hate crimes. Those are the four. And then we're going to do these practice things here, a few of them together with you. Okay? So pay close attention. So those of you who are in my J150 class, that is drugs and crime, will know a lot of this when it comes to drug laws. And you're going to recognize, and you're going to hear me say this as I say it in that class, that there is a correlation between crime and drugs. And what the drug laws have attempted to do is to, how should I say, increase the sentences for individuals. However, though, there is a movement, as I shared in my J250 class, for law enforcement to recognize the fact that we have an epidemic, particularly with heroin and opioids in this country, and that many individuals who are hooked on these drugs started in an innocent fashion, just trying or either abusing prescription drugs such as painkillers and those kinds of things for pain, and getting to the point that the body required more and stronger drugs in order to alleviate the pain. So what the law does is it attempts to deal with something that we consider, as some people say, is moral, against moral values. However, because moral values are something that adversely may affect you, but not others. But that's not true in the real application of drug laws. I understand it totally because I have a sister who this month, I think it was Saturday, was the anniversary of her 25th anniversary of her death, overdosing on cocaine. One of the hardest jobs I ever had. She was my youngest sister, and very difficult. And I'm sure that many of you understand on a personal level, and some of you that work right now understand on even a professional level, the effects that drug laws have on the community and on families themselves. So it says here, the decision to use drugs is a decision of morality. Again, I explained that, okay, that statement doesn't relieve me any, because what happens is these laws are an attempt to control the individuals who utilize, who sell and distribute the drugs. And as it says here, some believe that these decisions are ones that are purely morality and there should be no legislation, whereas some believe that there's need for legislation to protect society from the irresponsible potential negative impacts. I'm one of the latter because of the fact that drugs do contribute to crime. And then the other thing that people should recognize is that there is a need for legislation to protect society. As you know, and I know, that there is a movement in this country to legalize marijuana in all of the states. We just recently in Illinois have done it. One of the earlier states to do it is Colorado and Massachusetts. I think California has it, and several other states. I don't know if any of you are from Minnesota. I don't know. I don't think Minnesota has legalized marijuana yet. If you know, let me know. But I don't think so. And I think if I'd be shocked if marijuana was legalized at this point in that state. States like Florida also, I think, might be a challenge to get it going. But states like and Wisconsin, I don't know. That's a very liberal state, so I don't know if they have or will be doing that soon. But the point of the matter is that there are laws now to try to legalize this stuff. And, you know, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, that I believe that even legalizing marijuana is going to create problems because it's a gateway drug. I don't care what anybody says. And so the drug laws, as it says here, are unique from a criminal law perspective because when drugs are ingested, it's an individual who's doing it, and the person most at risk of harm is the user. Again, I take contend against that statement because there are others that are harmed, starting with the individual's family, the ability to have a livelihood, the ability to be able to obey other laws such as robberies and burglaries and car thefts and other types of property crimes that come about because of individuals supporting their habits. So it says here that there are no victims in the traditional sense when it comes to drug use, possession, or sale. I don't like those statements, and like I said again, I dismiss them summarily. Then it says, however, there are instances when innocent people are harmed by drug-related crime. Well, I just said that a few minutes ago. It says an innocent bystander who is caught in the crossfire of a drug-related turf could be a victim. Well, again, anybody can be a victim of a drug user because they might commit robberies or burglaries. I talk about one of my friends years ago that I represented. This goes back to in the 80s, and this young man had a cocaine problem, and he had been arrested numerous times for burglary or residential burglary. And so I started to represent him, and generally I have the families to get individuals out on bail. But I recommended to this family that they don't do so because I could see he had a very serious problem. Well, they went against what I said, got him out, said that they would keep an eye on him. Well, you know what happened? He snuck out of the house, went across town to try to do a burglary, crossed over the dangerous highway, and on the way back, the police were pursuing him, and he tried to make it back, and he was hit several times by trucks and vehicles on the highway and killed instantly. So that family was devastated, including the young girl who is now, let's see, I think she's 43. Yeah, because I think she's the same age as one of my daughters. She's not 43 yet, will be 43 in October, but her dad died while she was a little kid. So the fact of the matter is that they start to talk about robbery motivated by addicts who commit crimes to obtain money. I already said that. Oops, that was my clock that fell. So what we're going to talk about is the enforcement of the use, possession, and sale of illegal drugs and narcotics, which is something that we talk about in the course that I teach on drugs and crime. So let's take a look at how drugs are set up. They have what they call the Uniform Controlled Substance Act, and what it does is just classifies drugs by schedule, and you'll notice that the drugs are set by schedule based upon how they might affect individuals. High potential for abuse is Schedule 1. So you get like heroin, LSD, ecstasy, Marijuana, again, marijuana is being removed from that because of what I said earlier. Schedule 2, you got oxycodone, fentanyl, opium, and cocaine. High potential for abuse as well, and no basis for using this, though it says acceptable medical use with restrictions. But that's the point I was saying earlier, is that they are abused. There are people, there's a video that are any of you guys that are here in this session today in my drugs and crime class. Whoops, that's, sorry about that. That shouldn't even be ringing. Are any of you in my drugs and crime class? Either of you? You can type in chat box yes or no. I don't think so. Okay. Donna, you're not either, are you? But okay, yeah, Gress was in last term. Yes. But the point of the matter is that in that course, you hear and learn the effects where people abuse painkillers and lead to more serious drugs like oxycodone and opium and cocaine, and you find yourself in a point where we're dealing with some very serious high-level narcotics. Schedule 3, lower potential for abuse, leads to moderate or low psychological or physical dependence. And that's when we start talking about stuff you can pretty much get in the store, Tylenol with codeine, and these other items. And then 4, you see it decrease Valium, and then the least potential is cough suppressant medication with codeine. But even these are mixed with drugs that makes you take some very strong drugs and you mix that together. And so what has happened is that the legislation and the laws on the book come out and deal with what we call the Uniform Controlled Substance Act. It says marijuana identified as a violent narcotic and an unspeakable scourge. Well, that doesn't seem like this is the way that the law is going in the country, as I said before. But the point of the issue that you'll discover is how these drugs are laced and what is used that go inside these drugs. And then in the 80s, crack cocaine came about. I used to be the village attorney in a town called Ford Heights, which was called the crack cocaine capital of the south suburbs, where these the crack was manufactured in some of these abandoned houses, and it was a cheap high, but it was very, very violent, because what people would do is that they would try to increase the use of this, and as a result, the government came out and began to focus once again on what we call the war on drugs in the 80s. Just say no, which became a slogan. But I have continued to teach. Just say no is something that's kind of easy for you to say, but when a person is addicted to this, it's not as easy. And it says here, rightfully so, although the war on drugs continues today, and examples of success can be cited, the drug problem still exists, and there are illicit drugs all over the place. And so we're finding ourselves in situations where the drugs are creating an epidemic with all kinds of abuses, opioids, opium, and opioids and other drugs. People overdose, and I talk about this book where an individual who came to Rasmussen, he did this book called From Dope to Hope, A Man in Recovery, and he tells this story about how he ended up becoming an addict and how his addiction led him to some pretty bad situations where it went, from crack and then just to oxycodone and just any kind of drug that you can think of that would take a person's life and turn them into a situation where they actually have a difficult time operating and living. And so there are all kinds of problems that individuals have because of these things. And so the legalization that's taking place in the country of marijuana, as it talks about here, 12% of the country in '69 supported legalization, and now it is 60% of the population supports legalization. And I'd already said Colorado or Oregon, I forgot to mention them, and I said California, I know Illinois, and Massachusetts. They have all legalized marijuana. And so that's why I was saying that. So some believe that it should be a Schedule II drug as opposed to a Schedule I drug because of the legalization. But once again, I repeat to you, we still have the problem. And so what we do is we continue to lock people up, send them to jail for not even large quantities, but small quantities, and individuals go to jail for years and years and years and years. And the jails are filled with individuals who will be recidivists because of the fact that what happens is that individuals are locked up, they're released back into society, and they become repeat offenders. And so what the government attempted to do was to control the distribution and sale, as opposed to working on the real problem, and that is the addict, the person who was hooked on these drugs and finding themselves in situations where we had very, very serious. I can tell you something that I know, that in Illinois, for example, and I'm reading from a statute that I discussed called Senate Bill 3023, where law enforcement is trying to help people, is that the opioid deaths in Illinois, the number of opioid deaths from overdoses increased by 82% in the last 3 years. These figures are probably up now. Opioid drug overdoses killed 45% more people than homicides people. Opioid drug overdoses killed 25% more people than motor vehicles. Opioid drug overdoses killed more people than gun-related causes, including homicide, suicide, and accidental shooting. And opioid overdoses are urban, suburban, and rural. So they're all over the place. And so what is happening is that we begin to recognize that we have a crisis of epidemic proportions. And so now what we're going to need to do is deal with it. And as I said, if you take the J150, you learn more about it. But anyway, you can take a look at the Uniform Control Law. So you can make all the laws you want. and it's still not going to change the situation, because it's just like many of these stores are closing up, chains throughout the United States, and now the method for distribution and sale of, I'm talking about not drugs, but of many items, is through the internet. And companies like Amazon are, taking over. But what I'm trying to tell you is that when you remove the market away, then you put it in a position where there's nobody to sell it to. So, so we look at it. So, as representing people as a lawyer, there are two ways that you can be in possession of a controlled substance. You can be in what we call actual possession, and that's when you actually physically have it, control of it, such as like as it says here, the bag of cocaine in the pocket, or what we call constructive, when a person has the right or ability to control the item, but it's not on their person, such as being in their car or maybe even in their home. But the point of the matter is that you can still be deemed to be in possession. Did you not know that if someone in your car has marijuana on them, you as the driver could be charged with not actual possession, but constructive possession as well? And so possession is interpreted both ways when it comes to sentencing people, such as Ohio. It says a possession of a controlled substance prohibits a person from knowingly possessing a controlled substance or controlled substance analog. Remember, possession can be interpreted and applied constructively or either actually. So what is a controlled substance analog? It is like if you take the other class, we call it like K2 spice. These are what we call manufactured drugs, and they might even come wrapped up looking like candy, but they can get you high like LSD or something along those lines, and they're controlled substances. And so then you find yourself in a situation where you can end up going to jail. And so the statutes try to deal with individuals, and it talks about the possession and the amount, and how the more you have, the more time you'll end up getting. And so the key thing that unfortunately happens is that the small fish are the ones who end up getting convicted, not the big guys that are actually responsible for it, like the cartels that you'll learn about when you take the J150, like El Chapo, Guzman, and who from Mexico, and there are other cartels that you'll discover. But the key thing is that individuals who are victims, that's what I call them, will sell the drugs to support their own habits as well. And they might try them, and then they become indentured servants and are forced to distribute the drug in order to support their habits. So it's a real serious issue dealing with drugs. So I'm going to move on from that because we got a lot more to go. Any questions about the drug issue? I think everybody pretty much understands that how things work. But like I said again, the key thing that we need to do is to help the people who are users and get them delivered from that. Okay? Look what it says. Controlled substances not only put the individual at risk of addiction and self-harm, but also put us all at risk when that individual gets behind the wheel of a car. That can happen. People are whacked out, and they. Now I'm not talking about on alcohol. We're going to talk about that a little later, but on drugs themselves. So now let's talk about drunk driving or drugged driving. So what is drunk driving? Once upon a time, driving a vehicle with a 0.10 blood alcohol content was the rule of the land. And that if an individual who blew on a breathalyzer and that it was 0.10 or higher, then they were considered as driving under influence. But there are so many deaths that are caused by drunk driving, where innocent people are killed on a daily basis. Look at some of these facts here. 28 people die each day in motor vehicle accidents because of alcohol-impaired drivers. Think about it. As you're driving along, heading in one direction, and vehicles are coming in the other direction, if that person coming at you is impaired, they may cross over, and you have nowhere to go, and you'll die as a result of a head-on collision. One person dies every 53 minutes. So just think about that. By the time we finish this lecture, one person could have died. Alcohol-impaired driving accounts for 31% of all driving fatalities because of the lack of control of the vehicle. People who think they can drive after drinking. A total of 9,967 people died in alcohol-related crashes in 2014, and that's up since that time. And then they talk about the financial impact and what it does. But I'm more concerned about the loss of life and the serious personal injuries that come about because of that. And so what law enforcement does, and I remember what we had to do, was watch for people who were swerving. There are programs now where you can even take the license plates, call 911, and report someone, and they will give you a reward. And it's not a snitch thing. You're saving people's life. I have seen people who have been driving down the street, and they go like bumper cars from one curb to another in the lane where the traffic is going in the other direction, and it creates a problem. And so we get back to what I had said earlier about the blood alcohol content, and that prior to 1998, 10.10 BAC blood alcohol content constituted a person who was illegal per se, driving under the influence. But because of the lobbying of many organizations, Mothers Against Drunk Driving and other similar type organizations, the law began to say, no, we need to change that by decreasing the blood alcohol content required. In other words, you're going to have 0.10. It became lowered to 0.08, which is where it is now. So if you operate a vehicle and you blow the breathalyzer and it turns out that your blood alcohol content is 0.08 or higher, then you are deemed to be driving under the influence, and your licenses can be suspended, and you can also be required to have to undergo some courses before you can even drive again. So all of our states now have the blood alcohol content of 0.08. Okay. Now let me show you what driving laws say. Operation or driving of a motor vehicle upon a highway, roadway, parking lot, or driveway accessible to the public. Does that mean that if you're sitting in your own car in your driveway, is that a place where you can get charged with driving under the influence, yes or no? You sure can, because it's accessible to the public. There was a well-known baseball player that I knew. Well, I'll say his name, Carlton Fisk, who played for the Boston Red Sox and the Chicago White Sox later in his career. Near where I'm living now, was found guilty of driving under influence. He was unconscious with the motor running and the keys in the ignition. But do you have to have the motor running in order to be charged with a driving under the influence case? Yes or no? Nope. No is correct. All you have to have is, what about if you're sitting in the driver's seat and you don't have the keys? You don't have the keys, but you're just sitting in the driver's seat. Can you get charged with driving under influence? No, because there's no chance that you're going to be able to do it unless you have one of those. You know what? Now they got these push-button vehicles. But if anybody knows anything about a push-button vehicle, my wife, her car is push-button, but she has to have her keys in her pocket or someplace like that. So if you have the capacity to do that, then in that case, there might be some adjustment. But no, in the normal course, cars, if you don't have the keys in there, you can't. So look what it says. In most states, even driving impaired along a private driveway can result in drunk driving. And some states, such as Wisconsin, prohibit drunk driving on private residential property unless the private property contains more than 4 units. That's an apartment. So it's Wisconsin's way of saying that apartments with 4 or more units are more populated, and in turn a drunk driver on such private property puts innocent people at risk, which is rightfully so. So the drunk driving laws are here for protection, okay? Many people think that they can drive after drinking. Some of you may know that the chief of police, Johnson, Superintendent Johnson, lost his position as chief of Chicago Police because he was found to be unconscious in a car and had, been drinking, and the keys were in the ignition. So the point of the matter is that these laws are here to protect us. Okay. So what about this? If you're driving under the influence of a vehicle, if you're driving while drinking, and you are sitting in the passenger side, is it possible for you to be charged with driving under the influence? Anybody else? Okay, that's a good point. That's a good factor. If you have your keys, then you could either one of two things. Even if you're not the driver, you're contributing to the driver, therefore you're responsible for it as well. So that's a good point, Adam. That's it. That's it. But if there are no keys or none of those type things present, then, and again, as I said, if you have one of those push button deals and you're the passenger and you push that and you tell the person put their foot on, because they have to put their foot on, I think it's the brake or the gas pedal or something, whatever it is to start it, then you push it, then you're doing the same thing too. So look at what it says. To prove homicide by intoxicated use, it must be shown that the defendant operated a motor vehicle, had it under their physical control, while under the influence of a drug or blood alcohol content of at least 0.08, or the driver is considered impaired based upon maybe some field sobriety tests. So the key thing is that be aware is that driving under the influence is something that is a very serious offense, and we don't take it lightly because of the possible loss of life. And then these are some observations, such as weaving, driving through a traffic signal, striking a curb. I was talking about that earlier. Driver's physical appearance, odor of intoxicants, red or bloodshot eyes, or slurred speech. Now, I know of an instance of a person who was driving and they had slurred speech, bloodshot eyes, but they were not driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs. What do you think happened with that person? What do you think was going on with that driver? Exactly. That's it, a stroke. I actually know of a few cases. I had one in my career, but I also knew of a prominent dentist in Chicago. And I think it was one of our politicians or judges, or one of them, that had that same thing happen. And then once it was determined what happened to that individual, then, of course, the charges were dismissed. But the key thing is that in the normal course, of course, the odors you can smell of alcohol. There are some mouthwashes that, or even toothpaste that you can use, and you can blow a breathalyzer and 0.08 or close to it. Some people didn't know that, but yeah, that can happen, and I've seen that happen before as well. Field sobriety tests, and we've had some of the people do some of these things. And so those are observation things that we as in law enforcement use. And so again, the key thing is that under Illinois law, states have what we call the implied consent. And that means that when you drive upon the road, you give consent to the test. If you do not take the test, then what you do is you create a problem for law enforcement to be able to prove, and penalties could be increased if you refuse to take the chemical test. Okay. However, though, there was a warrant requirement that was established in Missouri versus McNeely, which had to do with blood tests. And it reached a stage where blood tests are easy to determine what's in that individual. However, though, because of the Missouri versus McNeely, there was some limitations. And take time to read that if you get a chance to. And it says, as correctly stated, before McNeely, and this goes back to when I was practicing, law enforcement could force a blood draw because the evidence would dissipate rapidly. But the McNeely case changed, and now law enforcement officers must get a warrant to force a blood draw in drunk driving cases unless some exigent circumstance exists. Okay. It's pretty easy to get it, though, electronically now at this point. Drugged driving can come about when a person is using drugs, not just illegal drugs, but any kind of drug. However, though, what happens is that some people find themselves taking a double dose of their medication accidentally, and then that can generally be used as a defense. But most drugged driving is from marijuana or cocaine or one of those drugs, and individuals are subject to be arrested. So, because it says, unlike alcohol, it's difficult to prove the quantity. So there are per se laws for having any quantity of illegal drugs in your system. And any amount of marijuana or cocaine, for example, if the blood draw, the driver is guilty of driving under the influence of a drug, and you can find yourself. Now, proving impairment caused by prescription drug is hard, especially since there's no scientific levels. But again, there are accidental overdoses where people forget and they take the drugs. And then this is a video you can take time to deal with drug overdoses. That's about a half an hour video. So distracted driving. As you should know, a vehicle could be a weapon, and it can cause serious injury or death. And it is an irresponsible activity to, as I use the term, multitask while under the wheel. And notice what the term distracted driving is. It says any activity that takes attention from driving, including talking. Some people say, you mean you're not supposed to be talking? Well, trust me, you can find yourself talking or arguing or fussing in a situation where your mind is off of your driving. Texting is a common thing that happens. Did you not know eating and drinking can also contribute to, and I'm not talking about alcohol, just drinking even water or either anything that takes your mind, or something that you're messing with, even with the radio or with the GPS, some other things. There's something else that I've seen that could be considered as distracted driving. Anybody have any other ideas about distracted driving other than what I've mentioned? Some examples of distracted driving? Any others? Give me a minute. Any? Adam, you're reading my mind. That is exactly right. I see it all the time, and I'm sure you have too. Pulled up to a stoplight, and you've seen, and I'm not going to say a female, but primarily females, putting on lipstick or something like that. Yes, those kinds of things. Anything else? Anything else? Anything else? Eating fast food. Yeah, well, I talked about that earlier. Yeah, eating. Yep, I talked about that earlier. Anything else? Yep. Did you not know that also playing loud music could do it? Did you know that? Did you not know wearing earbuds or headphones can also do it, because you can't hear sounds and things as well, or they're dulled? Same kind of thing. I've seen cases where that's used. And so anyway, then, yeah. The other thing is I want to talk about is we started talking about the high rate of insurance for teenagers. When you get 18, 19, in your early 20s, females are high, but males are even higher, because it says statistically that males create more accidents. But look at all of the different things. It says many jurisdictions, including Illinois, require a handheld wireless telephone, digital assistant, or portable motor, but doesn't include a GPS. Now, here's something that troubles me, and this is what troubles me. You drive up next to somebody, and you see that GPS is right there. It looks like a little TV screen. I still say that there are problems with that because of the fact it's like something that can distract you. Now, Many manufacturers, including the manufacturer of my wife's car that I just bought for her this past year, um, it has the salesperson was pointing out that the things were at eye level or something along those lines, so that you don't have to take your eyes off of the road so much. Again, I still say that there are problems with those kind of things. So anyway, it's quite clear that you're not supposed to have your cell phone or any of those things in your hand. And there are so many people that you see that they will text and they will find themselves in situations where even the light changes and they'll just all of a sudden take off. But it's clear that many accidents that happen have to do with texting. There's a lot of them. It says the challenge of enforcing distracted driving laws include proving that a person was actually using a device while driving. Merely glancing at an incoming call is typically not considered as use. Of course, though, if the police clearly sees a motorist holding their cell phone up in their line of sight and manipulating the letters and their thumbs up, for example, composing a message, in that case, they can get busted for it. So distracted driving, again, it's a very serious problem, and we need to be aware of it. And so the final thing that I want to talk about is hate crimes. Any crime that's committed that could not be so serious, but if the crime against individuals is because of their, as it says here, their race, sexual preference, or a disability, then these are just a few that can elevate a crime that would not be a serious offense from even a misdemeanor to a felony. But in order to prove the crime, it is important for law enforcement, for the prosecution, to be able to prove that the thoughts of the suspect. Usually those come about because the suspect does what? What is it that generally nails a suspect in a hate crime case? Does anybody know? We've kind of talked about this in a few weeks ago when we were talking about crimes against persons. What is it that creates the problem for the person who commits the offense and elevates their actions to a hate crime? What is something that's commonly used in a court of law, or that you think that would probably take it to the level where it might be a hate crime? Anybody? You're going to see some examples when we take these practice exams. Well, I'll tell you. This right here. Your mouth. And what people say oftentimes cause the increase, just like we were talking about when we were talking about manslaughter and we're talking about murder, and how your mouth can show the malice that you had here. And so it says, although it may be appear to be simple in its face, hate crimes can be challenging, and because of you can't read a person's mind. But the point of the matter is, it actually comes about when people intentionally commit the crime based on one of these protected classes. So look at what happens. It says, penalty in crimes elevated to hate crimes, intentionally committing a crime against another and selecting the victim or their property in whole and part because of the person's belief or perception regarding the race, religion, color, disability, sexual orientation, national origin, whether or not the actor's belief or perception was correct. And some of the states have made it a little tougher. Wisconsin's hate crime law contains a similar element to others across the country, that the most difficult element to prove is that the person intentionally selected them because of one of those classes. But if a synagogue, they said, is vandalized, police, prosecutors, they say, can't presume that the location was protected, selected because of a specific hate crime toward religious beliefs. There has to be some evidence to support the facts that this can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the synagogue was intentionally targeted because the actor hated the faith, of course. And this act, it says, element can be met if the person, of course, confesses and tells the police that. But like I said, this thing right here. But it says, even statements made at the time of the crime may not be enough to satisfy the intentional targeting of element. For example, if a white person and a black person fought each other and racial epithets were directed at each other during the fight, the words in the heat of the moment may not be enough to intentionally target individuals. But other precipitating factors may have to be there, such as fighting words and racial epithets thrown at individuals that might make it easier, but not, however, possible. However, it says, concluding this section, if an actor was heard saying, I'm going to knock out that disabled person because he's in a wheelchair, there it is right there. It's based on what I said earlier. So anyway, there are cases such as Wisconsin versus Mitchell, where the defendant, an African American, was sentenced to 2 additional years in prison because intentionally targeting, instigating a fight against a white victim. Well, Mitchell's intent to target a white victim was demonstrated by his words when he said, "There goes a white boy, go get him," just before the victim was chased down and battered. He was convicted of aggravated battery and a violation of Wisconsin hate statute. Okay, Mitchell argued that the penalty enhanced violated his free speech rights. Well, the Supreme Court said nope, and concluded that his right to free speech, when he carried out the act, free speech and thought, wow, vile are protected, but they may violate hate crimes when the thoughts are tunneled into action. That's the key. So you get a chance to read this as well, okay? And so that's what I want to talk about for tonight. Any questions about anything we've talked about or covered tonight? Okay, so now let's get ready again for what I always tell you to do. This is where I'm going to ask you guys to actively participate. So let's look at some key terms. We look at a few of them, and I do encourage you to use your flashcards yourself because I only do a few of them. And then I'll allow that to run. Here it comes. Okay. The 3 standardized tests of horizontal gaze, nystagmus, HGN, walk and turn, and one-leg stand that police officers use to determine if a motorist is impaired. What do we call them? There we go. That's exactly what they are. Standard field sobriety test. Very good. A legal concept that means in of itself, often applied to drunk driving cases. What's the legal concept, we call it? It's 2 words. Anybody know? Per se. Per se. That means basically the situation speaks for itself, per se, illegal per se. You saw that with the blood alcohol content of 0.8 and 0.08 and then 0.10 it used to be. Applied to drunk driving cases, a person who is seated on the driver's seat with the ability to put the vehicle in motion is said to have physical control of the vehicle. What do we call that? Physical control of the vehicle, but it's the same thing, because that's what would be. So you'd have physical control of the vehicle. That's the point. It's just saying applied to a drunk driving cases. So a person who is seated on the driver's side with the ability to put the vehicle in motion is said to be in physical control of that vehicle. A substance that is substantially similar to the chemical structure of a Schedule 1 or 2 drugs, such as designer drugs, K2 or spice, which are substantially similar to marijuana and therefore are controlled substance. What do we call those? Starts with an A. Controlled substance analogs. Remember that earlier when I told you, I said they're like candy or something. They look like it, but K2 and spice. The impaired operation of a motor vehicle while under the influence of illicit drugs and or the misuse of prescription drugs. What is that? Okay. But it's drugged. Yeah, drugged. It was right there. Let's go back to it. It's right there. Drugs, drugged. So be careful. Alcohol could be the one that doesn't have that in there. Occurs when and you were technically right, but more specific. And you have to be more specific when you're taking these tests. Everybody should know that now. Occurs when a person has physical control over a drug, typically on their person. What do we call that? I told you there are 2 ways of having possession. One starts with an A, and the other one is C. When a person has physical control, typically on their person. Actual possession. The other was constructive. And then the last one I'm going to do here is, if you operate a motor vehicle on a roadway and a law enforcement requests you to submit to an evidentiary chemical test, it's implied that you will grant consent. What do you call that? It's already, the answer is given in the question. Take this word and this word, and you got it. So I said it was right there. All right, so so you go through and you do these. All right. So let's go down. I'm looking for something, so hold on a second. Okay, I know it's here. I'm just trying to see. Looking for something. Okay, I see it now. All right, so let's go back down to here. All right, so now practice for drunk driving and blood draws. No, that's not what I want to do. I want to go over this. This. I think it's this one. Wait a minute. I did this before. It's not. Wait a minute. I thought I had. Oops, wrong thing. That's your email. Let's go back. I had it. I did it before. I'm trying to figure for practice drug. I did this. I did this when I was teaching before. This is where I always get. No, that's not it. That's all right. Anyway, the key thing that I want you to do is to be able to, let me see, what in the world am I know I'm hitting it right here. Okay, this is supposed to open up. No, that's not it. Okay, well, anyway, you can read this over, crimes against moral values, and consider this scenario here. Okay, so let's come down to, I don't know why this doesn't open. It's supposed to operate like this. See, this is what I'm trying to understand, why it's not. I'm going to have to check with PSC. But anyway, for practice, identify the following drug schedules. And this is how you do them. You put them together. Okay, let's start the activity. Okay, so now, match each category with the correct drug schedule. Drugs that have acceptable medical use with some restrictions. Some acceptable. Is that Schedule 1, 2, or 3? You said Schedule 2. Okay. Drugs that have no acceptable medical use in the United States. You say 1. Drugs that have a lower potential for abuse, but may need to moderate dependence. Schedule what? Okay. And then drugs that have a lower potential for abuse, but may need to moderate dependence. Let's see how we did. I have a feeling that some of these are wrong, but partially correct. Yep. So you could toy around with these, and you can see which ones you got wrong. I figured that there was something wrong with some of them. So anyway, you can take the time to go and do that. But if you get your chart out, then you'll be able to have that. And then the last thing I want to do, because 9:45, but make sure you go back and do what I just did and figure out which two were wrong. There were two that were wrong, and I know which ones they were, but I'm not going to tell you. The quiz. Now, this is just like, as some of you already have agreed, the quiz you're going to be taking next week. Next week, Professor? Yes, by the 20th, which is your final exam. According to the federal law, marijuana is a what drug with high potential for abuse? Yeah. Yeah, but where are they considering moving it to? It is one right now. Where are they considering moving it to? Yep. Two. You are a police officer and you stop a motor vehicle for speeding. While standing along the open driver's window, you smell burnt marijuana coming from the vehicle. A search reveals marijuana in the center console. The driver claims it's not his. You may still take enforcement because the driver is in what of the marijuana? Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yep. While searching, a man who is under arrest for a warrant, you locate a substance that is discovered to be homemade with chemical properties similar to ecstasy. This substance is considered a what? We already talked about it a little earlier. Mm-hmm. Yep. As soon as you see it, manufactured, homemade chemical, similar to ecstasy, that's exactly what it is. Incident to a lawful arrest. You search Jane and you find cocaine in her front left pants pocket. Jane claims it's not hers while stating, they aren't my pants, although she's wearing them. You still arrest Jane because this is an example of what? What is it? Did you say A, absolute, or actual, or constructive or partial? Which one did you say? I'm sorry, I think, did you say A? Said B. Okay. Yeah. There's no absolute. Okay. It's either actual or constructive. Don't be tricked. Because some of these terms, I'm telling you, let me tell you something, guys. When you take these tests, there are two in there that don't fit. Then there's two that are close. This is the last one I'm going to do. You come up on a motorist alongside the highway. As you approach the vehicle, you see the driver start the vehicle. You didn't see him drive the vehicle. Upon speaking with the driver, you discover that he is intoxicated. What is the best course of action in this case? Okay, I'm going to show you something. Arrest the driver for drunk driving because he was driving the vehicle. That might be true, but do nothing because you didn't see him driving the vehicle. Arrest the driver because he was in physical control of the vehicle. Arrest him for an illegal per se. It can't be per se because per se has to do with a percentage. That's it. Okay, I'll do one more. Which three field sobriety tests do law enforcement use? Which one? A, B, C, or D? Which one? Somebody put it up there. Which one is it? There you go. Very good. And so these are the things that you want to do to get yourself ready. Go back and do week 4, the one before that, this one, and then do the same thing for next week before you do that. Any questions before I give you the key phrase? Okay, drunk driving. That's it. So give me that, and you get your points. All right, I'll see you guys next week for our final lecture. Thank you guys, Adam, Carol, Donna, Grace, for coming out again. And I will see you next week at the same time. Have a good week.